At the end of her life, Lillie Langtry was far from the island that made her. She was in Monaco, near the Mediterranean. In a world of casinos, villas, warm light, and old names fading quietly behind curtains. She had once been the woman London stopped to look at. She had been painted, photographed, admired, judged, copied, desired, and sold back to the public in images. She had been close to a future king. She had stood on stages in London and America while audiences paid simply to see the woman they had read about. By then, the world had changed. The crowds that once gathered for a beautiful woman in a room were beginning to belong to another age. Moving pictures were replacing the old theater of presence. Newspapers had learned to make and destroy celebrities faster than society could invite them to dinner. The machinery of fame that Lillie had helped invent was moving on without her. And still, when she died in 1929, newspapers treated the death as something more than the passing of an old actress. Because Lillie Langtry had never been only an actress. She was one of the first women in modern public life to understand that beauty could become capital, that a face could become a brand, that scandal could become advertising, that attention, if handled correctly, could be turned into property, travel, independence, and money. But this is not a simple story about a woman who used beauty and won. It is a story about what victory cost her. Because the woman who learned to make the world pay for looking at her could not make her own daughter forgive her. She could command a theater, a drawing room, a racecourse, and a newspaper column. She could not command the one private relationship that her public life had helped destroy. That is the real question behind Lillie Langtry. How did a rector's daughter from a small island in the English Channel become one of the most famous women in the English-speaking world? And why did the freedom she built with such intelligence still leave her, at the end, so alone? Before she became Lillie Langtry, she was Emily Charlotte Le Breton. She was born in Jersey in 1853, on an island that sits between England and France, close enough to both to feel shaped by both, but fully contained by neither. Jersey was small, old, proud, and watchful. Its lanes were narrow. Its society was intimate. Its church life mattered. Its family names mattered. In a place like that, privacy was difficult, reputation was fragile, and a girl could feel the horizon pressing against her before she understood why. Lillie's father, William Corbett Le Breton, was the Dean of Jersey and rector of St. Saviour. Her childhood was not one of poverty. The rectory was respectable, secure, and disciplined. But it was not London. It was not a court. It was not a theater. It was not a place where a girl with unusual beauty and unusual energy could easily imagine a future large enough to contain her. She was the only girl among brothers. That mattered. Many Victorian girls were trained into stillness. They were taught manners, restraint, accomplishment, and the delicate arts of becoming acceptable wives. Lillie grew up differently. Surrounded by boys, she learned to move with a physical confidence that polite society would later find both fascinating and slightly dangerous. She studied more than many girls were allowed to study. She rode, read, climbed, swam, and developed the habits of someone who had never fully believed that the rules for women applied to her in the ordinary way. Jersey did not abuse her. It limited her. For Lillie, that was enough. She grew tall. She became striking in a way that people struggled to describe without sounding foolish. Her beauty would later be compared to flowers, to the sea, to paintings, to anything except the plain fact that when she entered a room, people looked. She learned this early. A beautiful girl in a small society learns quickly that attention has weight, can flatter, can endanger, can open doors. It can also become a cage of its own. By her teenage years, Lillie understood that being looked at was a form of power. What she did not yet know was how to turn that power into freedom. Jersey offered few exits. A rector's daughter could attend social gatherings, meet officers, ride under watchful eyes, and wait for the acceptable future to present itself. Marriage was the respectable route out of dependence. But marriage, for a girl like Lillie, had to do more than provide a husband. It had to provide movement. She did not need romance first. She needed an exit. That exit arrived with Edward Langtry. Edward was an Irish widower with private income, a taste for leisure, and, most importantly, a yacht. The red gauntlet mattered because it represented everything Jersey did not. Open water, distance, coastlines beyond the island, a life that could move. Lillie was 20 when she married him in 1874. It would be easy to tell this as a love story, but that would make it less interesting and probably less true. Edward Langtry was not the great passion of her life. He was not the great mind that met hers. He was not the man who understood her hunger. He was, above all, a way out. The yacht carried the meaning that Edward himself did not. For a young woman who had spent her life looking at horizons, the Red Gauntlet was not just a boat. It was proof that the horizon could be crossed. In the beginning, that may have been enough. Marriage gave her a new name, new movement, and the possibility of a wider world. She had escaped Jersey's smallness. But escape is not the same as arrival. Lillie would soon discover that leaving an island did not automatically grant entrance into power. When she and Edward moved to London, they did not become important overnight. London was not waiting for them. They were respectable but not central. Married but not fashionable. Comfortable enough to appear in society, but not connected enough to matter. London society in the 1870s was a fortress built from rank, invitation, money, scandal, bloodlines, and the quiet approval of people who did not explain their decisions. Edward had no force of personality to push through those gates. Lillie had no aristocratic birth to open them. For a time, they drifted at the edge of the world she wanted to enter. This is important because Lillie Langtry did not become famous simply because she was beautiful. London was full of beautiful women, or at least women dressed and arranged to appear so. Beauty alone was not enough. It had to be staged correctly. It had to be noticed by the right person, repeated by the right artist, whispered by the right hostess, and reproduced in the right form. In 1877, that finally happened. At a society reception, Lillie entered a room dressed with a simplicity that made every other woman look overdecorated. The fashion of the age favored silk, satin, jewels, layers, and expense. Lillie appeared in black with minimal ornament, her hair arranged plainly enough to seem almost severe. In a room full of diamonds, she became unforgettable by refusing decoration. The effect was immediate. She did not look like a woman trying to compete with the others. She looked like a painting that had accidentally stepped into the room. People noticed. Artists noticed. Frank Miles, already moving in artistic and social circles, helped turn her image into something that could travel beyond the room itself. Soon, Lillie was being drawn, discussed, and reproduced. This was the moment when her beauty stopped belonging only to the people who saw her in person. It became an image, public object, a thing that could circulate. Painters and photographers gave society a way to possess her without knowing her. Postcards and reproductions carried her face into shops, parlors, and hands that would never touch the world she moved through. She became associated with the title that would follow her for the rest of her life. The Jersey Lillie. The name was perfect. It sounded pure. It sounded natural. It sounded as if she had simply bloomed into fame, untouched by calculation. That was the illusion. Lillie may not yet have understood the full business value of her image, but she understood the attention. She saw how quickly a room could change when people wanted to look. She saw how men responded. She saw how women measured her. She saw how a face, properly presented, could do what a family name could not. Could open doors. The world was beginning to spend her beauty before she had learned how to charge for it. That is the key to Lillie Langtry. She did not invent the fact that society consumed women's beauty. Victorian society had been doing that long before she arrived. It displayed women, judged them, painted them, married them, praised them, ruined them, and replaced them. What made Lillie different was that she slowly learned to reverse the direction of the exchange. If people were going to look, there would eventually be a price. But before she could control that price, she entered the most dangerous form of patronage in Britain. Royal attention. The Prince of Wales, Albert Edward, the future King Edward VII, was a man whose desires had social consequences. He was not merely a private admirer. He was the heir to the throne. When he favored a woman, doors opened. Hostesses adjusted. Invitations appeared. People who might have hesitated found reasons not to hesitate anymore. Lillie's connection with the prince turned her fame into access. The affair made her more than a professional beauty. It moved her into the center of a social machine where desire, rank, gossip, and power all worked together. She was still married to Edward Langtry, but Edward became less a husband than a social necessity, present enough to preserve the fiction of respectability, absent enough to make the arrangement possible. This was not unusual because Victorian society was innocent. It was unusual because Lillie was not aristocratic. She was not born to the inner circle. She had entered it through image, fascination, and the appetite of a prince. That made her position both dazzling and unstable. For a while, the system protected her. Royal attention could make a woman acceptable, could soften judgment, could turn scandal into glamour. It could make creditors patient and hostesses polite. It could take a rector's daughter from Jersey and place her at tables where dukes, diplomats, and financiers watched her as if she were a new kind of social instrument. Lillie watched them back. She learned. She learned that beauty could open doors, but only power decided how long they stayed open. She learned that reputation could be borrowed from a man, but borrowed reputation could be recalled. She learned that the same society that celebrated her would cut her off if the royal light moved elsewhere. And eventually it did. A royal affair has its own natural lifespan. The Prince of Wales was not a man known for permanent devotion. His attention drifted. The invitations that had once seemed endless became less certain. The protection around Lillie weakened. What had looked like triumph began to reveal its trap. The prince had given her access. He had also shown her the danger of access that depends on a man's desire. If a man can raise you by wanting you, he can ruin you by wanting someone else. For Lillie, the end of royal favor was not only emotional. It was financial. The same world that had extended credit to a woman protected by the future king could remember its limits very quickly once that protection faded. Dressmakers, landlords, merchants, and social expectations did not disappear just because the prince looked away. The bills remained. The income did not. Edward Langtry could not rescue her. He had never really understood the machinery that had made his wife famous. He had not built her rise, and he could not manage her fall. Lillie had reached the first great crisis of her adult life. She had been admired. She had been desired. She had been painted and reproduced. She had been close to the throne. But none of that had made her secure. The system had used her beauty as currency, but the currency was still controlled by other people. Now she had to decide whether to disappear with the end of royal favor, or learn how to make the public pay her directly. The answer would scandalize the society that had already consumed her image for free. Lillie Langtry would go on the stage. But before she could fully turn fame into business, she would make a private decision that would follow her for the rest of her life. In Paris, in 1881, she gave birth to a daughter, Jean Marie. That child would become the deepest cost of Lillie's public survival. Because Lillie could turn beauty into money. She could turn scandal into tickets. She could turn attention into a career. But the daughter born in secrecy would one day ask a question that no audience, no prince, no advertisement, and no fortune could answer. What kind of freedom requires a mother to hide her own child? The birth of Jean Marie was not only a private crisis. It was a business problem. That sounds cold. It was cold. But Lillie Langtry was living in a world where a woman's respectability could determine whether she had credit, invitations, work, protection, and income. A child born under uncertain circumstances, at the wrong time, in full view of London society, could undo everything she had learned to build. The father was not publicly settled in a way that protected her. The marriage to Edward Langtry was already damaged. The Prince of Wales had moved on. The creditors were circling. And the woman who had been celebrated as the Jersey Lillie was now facing the part of fame that the postcards did not show. Fame can make a woman visible. It can also make concealment necessary. Jean Marie was born in Paris in 1881. The truth of her birth was kept away from public life. The arrangement protected Lillie's name, her earning power, and whatever remained of her access to society. It also created the wound that would outlast every performance, every endorsement, every racehorse, and every title she later acquired. The child was not only born in secrecy, she became the cost of keeping Lillie's public life intact. For the moment, Lillie could not afford to live as a mother in the open. She had to live as a woman who could still be sold. That is the brutal logic of her reinvention. When royal favor weakened, Lillie had no reliable husband to rescue her and no family fortune large enough to restore her position. The same people who had admired her while the prince watched now began to measure her differently. Admiration had been extended on credit. Credit could be withdrawn. A woman like Lillie had two choices. She could retreat, accept a smaller life, and become a cautionary story whispered in drawing rooms. Or she could take the things society had already been consuming and charge admission. In 1881, she chose the stage. The decision shocked the world that had already made a spectacle of her. That is the hypocrisy at the center of the moment. Society had been staring at Lillie for years. Artists had drawn her. Postcards had carried her face. Men had crowded around her. Women had judged her. Hostesses had used her presence as an event. But when she chose to appear before the public for money, the rules suddenly changed. A lady could be admired in a private room. A lady could be painted. A lady could become the subject of gossip. A lady could even be associated with a prince, as long as society agreed not to say too much too plainly. But a lady did not work. A lady did not stand under stage lights and let strangers buy tickets to see her. That was the line Lillie crossed. The world had no objection to consuming her image. It objected when she began to own the transaction. Her early acting was not the work of a born theatrical genius. Even sympathetic observers had to admit that. She had presence before she had craft. Her voice, movement, and technique would develop over time, but in the beginning, audiences came for something simpler. They came to see her. They came to see the woman from the portraits, the woman from the postcards, the woman who had been close to the future king, the woman London had been discussing for years without ever fully possessing. The theater turned gossip into revenue. Every seat sold proved that disgrace, properly managed, could become a form of capital. This was the beginning of Lillie's real business education. The prince had taught her what access was worth. The stage taught her something more durable. Public curiosity could be sold directly. She no longer needed a drawing room to display her. She no longer needed a prince to make people look. She could gather the audience herself. And once she understood that, England was not enough. America was waiting. When Lillie arrived in New York in 1882, she entered a country that understood spectacle with almost no shame. America did not have the same old aristocratic codes as London. It had money, newspapers, railroads, theaters, and an appetite for fame that was still forming its own rules. To Americans, Lillie was not merely a woman with a scandalous past. She was an event. The press knew how to sell her before she ever stepped on stage. Her beauty, her royal connection, her fall from society, her decision to become an actress. All of it became copy. Newspapers prepared the audience in advance. The public did not need to understand her acting. It needed to understand that she was famous. That was enough. In New York, crowds came because proximity to fame had become a pleasure of its own. The people in the theater were not only watching a performance. They were watching a woman who carried the scent of royalty, scandal, and London into an American room. Lillie grasped the American market quickly. Americans did not require inherited rank to be fascinated. They could turn anyone into a commodity if the story was strong enough. And Lillie's story was strong enough. A rector's daughter from Jersey, a society beauty, a royal mistress, a fallen favorite, a woman who walked onto the stage because respectability no longer paid her bills. That was not simply biography. It was marketing. She toured. She appeared in city after city. She traveled with the aura of someone people believed they already knew. Posters, playbills, newspaper columns, and advance stories did the work that aristocratic gossip had done in England. Her face moved ahead of her. By the time she arrived, the audience was already prepared to look. This is where Lillie's story becomes larger than Victorian scandal. She was helping reveal a new economy. The economy of the famous person as product. Before cinema created screen stars, before radio created national voices, before television and social media turned private lives into public businesses, Lillie was learning that a person could become a market. Her name could sell tickets. Her image could sell newspapers. Her reputation could sell curiosity. And soon, her face could sell soap. The Pears soap advertisement remains one of the most important symbols in her life. Lillie is often credited as one of the earliest major celebrity endorsers of a commercial product, and in the story of modern advertising that matters. Because the advertisement did more than use her beauty. It attached her identity to a consumer good. The message was simple: buy the soap and touch the world of Lillie Langtry. It was not rational. It was modern. A product could borrow a person's glamour. A company could convert fame into trust. A woman's face, already circulating through postcards and portraits, could be placed beside a bar of soap and made to move merchandise. Lillie did not invent the desire to look at beautiful women. She helped show business how to monetize it. That made her both powerful and exposed. Because every income stream still depended, in some way, on the same public gaze. Theater audiences paid to watch her. Advertisers paid to borrow her face. Patrons paid to stand near her. Newspapers paid attention because readers did. Even when she began building independence, the raw material remained the thing society had noticed first: her beauty. She understood the danger. Beauty fades. Public curiosity moves on. Men grow bored. Audiences grow restless. Creditors remain patient only while money is coming in. So Lillie did what many of the men around her had failed to do. She diversified. She earned from the stage. She toured. She accepted endorsements. She took gifts when they served her. She moved through American society with increasing confidence. Some accounts describe property investments and large sums passing through her hands. Those details must be handled carefully unless verified. But the larger truth is clear. Lillie was no longer merely surviving on male favor. She was building an enterprise around herself. The woman who had once depended on being seated near a prince now understood the value of controlling her own booking, her own image, her own movement, and her own name. That did not make her free from men. It made her harder to own. Men still entered her life with money, desire, and expectations. Frederick Gebhard, the wealthy American admirer, became one of the most visible. He brought gifts, horses, attention, and devotion. He moved through her career as both patron and companion, part of the old system Lillie had not fully escaped. The difference was that Lillie was learning how to take what the system offered without surrendering the center of herself. That was what made her dangerous. She did not reject male patronage in some pure modern way. She used it. She understood that the world had not been built to reward women directly, so she took indirect routes. If a man wanted to give her horses, jewelry, introductions, or cash, she accepted what could be converted into independence. That is not romance. That is strategy. The difficulty, of course, was that strategy does not protect the heart as cleanly as it protects a bank account. Men who gave lavishly often expected possession. Men who helped build a woman's fortune could begin to imagine they had bought the woman herself. Lillie's life became a constant negotiation between taking what power offered and refusing to be fully captured by it. This is the darker side of the patronage economy. A woman could gain mobility through men. She could also become trapped by their claims. Some accounts of Lillie's later relationships describe violence, payments, humiliation, and danger. Those details should be used only where the evidence is strong. But even without the most dramatic claims, the pattern is clear enough. The system that rewarded her beauty also exposed her body and reputation to men who believed access gave them rights. Lillie had learned to make men pay for looking. Some men believed payment meant ownership. The stage made her famous again. Advertising made her modern. But racing gave her something more dangerous. It gave her a scoreboard. In society, men could say she had been lucky. In the theater, critics could say audiences came only for scandal. In advertising, moralists could call her vulgar. But on a racecourse, the argument became harder to control. A horse either won or lost. A wager either paid or failed. And Lillie understood the value of entering a world where male judgment could still be embarrassed by results. The racing world had no comfortable place for a woman like Lillie, so she found a way around the discomfort. She used the name Mr. Jersey. The alias was almost too perfect. It pointed back to the island she had escaped and disguised the woman who was using it. Everyone who mattered could understand the fiction. The racing world knew. The bookmakers knew. The people watching the colors knew. But the name gave the system what it needed most: deniability. Officially, the owner was Mr. Jersey. In reality, Lillie Langtry was entering one of the most masculine arenas in British public life and taking her place inside it. When the racing world had no proper place for a woman, Lillie gave it a man's name and took the money anyway. Her horse Merman became the proof that this was not simply vanity. Merman won. Not once as a novelty, but in races important enough to force the sporting world to take notice. The details of every sum and wager should be verified before they are treated as fact, but the larger achievement is secure. Under the colors associated with Mr. Jersey, Lillie became a serious figure in racing. This was one of the great reversals of her life. The woman who had first been famous because men looked at her was now winning money in a world where men had not expected her to compete. She had entered London through beauty. She had survived the fall of royal attention through theater. She had expanded in America through spectacle. She had entered advertising through her image. Now, through racing, she proved she could make calculations in the open market of risk. That did not mean society fully accepted her. Society rarely gives a woman credit without attaching a penalty. But by the end of the 1890s, Lillie had built something that no prince could simply withdraw. She had money. She had name recognition on 2 continents. She had a stage career that had matured from curiosity into craft. She had racing success. She had admirers, enemies, and a reputation that no longer depended on one man's invitation. She had become, in every meaningful sense, self-made. And yet the old wound remained untouched. Jean-Marie was growing older. The daughter who had been hidden to protect Lillie's public life was no longer an infant who could be managed by family arrangements and silence. Children grow. Secrets age with them. A lie that is useful when a child is small becomes more dangerous as the child begins to understand the world. Lillie could manage critics. She could manage creditors. She could manage lovers. She could manage audiences. She could manage the fiction of Mr. Jersey. But the fiction around Jean-Marie was different. It was not a stage name. It was not a brand. It was not a social convenience that could be dropped when it no longer served. It was a child's life. And a child's life cannot remain organized around an adult's reputation forever. That is the moral pressure building under all of Lillie's public success. Every time her name grew larger, the private secret became heavier. Every triumph made the silence more difficult to defend. Every new identity she acquired, actress, endorser, racehorse owner, later Lady de Bathe, stood beside the one identity she could not publicly claim without consequence. Mother. In 1899, Lillie married Hugo Gerald de Bathe, a man much younger than she was. The marriage gave her another structure, another social position, and eventually another name. It did not give the story emotional peace. By then, Lillie had long since learned not to expect marriage to solve what marriage had never been able to solve. Edward had given her movement. The prince had given her access. The stage had given her income. America had given her scale. Advertising had given her a business model. Racing had given her a way to compete under a man's name. Hugo would give her a title. None of them could give her back the years in which her daughter had been kept outside the truth. That is where the next and hardest part of the story begins. Lillie Langtry had won the public game more completely than almost any woman of her generation. She had learned how to convert beauty into money before the modern world had a language for personal branding. She had stepped through the systems built to consume her and taken a share of the profit. But private life does not always accept public victories as payment. The woman who could turn a face into a fortune was about to face the one account she could not settle. Jean-Marie would learn the truth. Not all at once, perhaps. Not in the clean, dramatic way that novels prefer. Family secrets often break differently. They leak through remarks, records, silences, and the careless confidence of people who assume a young woman already knows what everyone else has known for years. What matters is not the exact room where the truth reached her. What matters is that the truth changed the meaning of her entire life. Jean-Marie was not simply learning that Lillie had hidden a fact. She was learning that her childhood had been arranged around another woman's survival. The visits, the silences, the family language, the careful distance, the story that made Lillie an aunt instead of a mother. All of it suddenly had a different shape. To Lillie, the concealment may have once seemed necessary. It protected her name, her income, and her ability to remain inside a world that punished women far more harshly than men. To Jean-Marie, it could only look like abandonment disguised as respectability. That is the wound no audience could applaud away. A mother had been turned into a performance. A daughter had been turned into a secret. Lillie could survive creditors, critics, lovers, and aristocrats. She could survive the end of royal favor. She could survive the judgment that came when she walked onto the stage. She could survive men who thought their money gave them rights over her. She could survive the racecourse under the name Mr. Jersey. But she could not negotiate with a daughter who finally knew the truth. That was the account she could not settle. Jean-Marie did not have to destroy Lillie publicly. She did not have to give society another scandal to consume. Her response could be quieter, and in some ways more devastating. She could withdraw. She could build her own life. She could allow the door between them to close without making a performance of the closing. For Lillie, that quiet distance may have been harder to defeat than open rage. Rage can be answered. Silence cannot always be entered. This is where Lillie's story becomes deeper than the story of a famous beauty. By the end of the 19th century, she had achieved a kind of success that should have been almost impossible for a woman of her origin. She had escaped Jersey. She had entered London society. She had become the companion of a future king. She had survived the fall from royal favor. She had become a professional actress. She had crossed the Atlantic and turned herself into an event. She had lent her image to commerce. She had moved through racing under a male name and won in a male world. She had married again and eventually carried a title. The public ledger looked astonishing. The private ledger did not balance. That is the moral center of Lillie Langtry's life. She was not punished because she failed. She was punished by what success required. In the world she inhabited, respectability was not a decoration. It was credit. It was housing. It was invitations. It was a way to keep working. It was the thin line between being called fascinating and being called ruined. Lillie learned this early, and she learned it well. She built her freedom inside a system that had never intended to give freedom to women like her. That required strategy. It also required concealment. And the deepest concealment was Jean-Marie. No amount of public applause could undo that. Lillie continued to perform. In time, she became more than a curiosity. The woman who had once been dismissed as a beauty trying to act developed craft, discipline, and control. She learned the stage the way she had learned society, by watching its machinery and adapting herself to it. She was not the greatest actress of her age. That was never the point. Her genius was understanding the room. She understood where attention gathered. She understood how to hold it. She understood how to make the audience feel that they were not merely watching a play, but witnessing a person whose life had already become a story. That gift carried her for decades. Yet even the best performance cannot hold history still. The world that made Lillie possible began to change. The professional beauty had been born from a very particular moment. Cheap images were becoming available. Portraits and postcards could travel. Newspapers could inflate reputation. Society still cared intensely about who entered which drawing room, who sat beside whom at dinner, and who was seen in a theater box. In that world, presence was everything. To see Lillie in person mattered because most people had only seen her as an image. A theater ticket became a form of access. The audience could sit in the dark and breathe the same air as the woman whose face had moved through shop windows, gossip columns, and royal rumor. But the new century brought new machines. Motion pictures began to change the meaning of fame. The gramophone changed entertainment. Wireless communication began to change distance. The public no longer needed to be in the same room as the famous body. Faces could become larger than life on screens. Voices could travel without the person. Entertainment could be reproduced mechanically, cheaply, repeatedly. The gaze moved on. That was the quiet danger for Lillie. She had mastered the older economy of presence. She knew how to enter a room. She knew how to stand before an audience. She knew how to make a drawing room, a theater, a racecourse, or a newspaper column turn toward her. But the future did not need her to enter the room. Could project someone else. Younger faces, newer scandals, faster images, cheaper thrills. The world did not reject her all at once. It simply developed other things to look at. That can be worse. A sudden fall can feel dramatic. A slow fading requires a person to watch the light move away inch by inch. Lillie kept working as long as she could. She toured, appeared, adapted, and carried the old name forward. Audiences still came. Reviewers still remembered. Her presence still had force. But the language around her began to change. People no longer spoke only of what she was. They spoke of what she still was. She still had beauty. She still had presence. She still commanded attention. That word "still" can sound like praise. It is also a warning. It means the world is measuring you against a version of yourself that no longer exists. By the 1920s, Lillie was no longer the woman who had shocked London in a black dress, or the woman whose closeness to a prince rearranged drawing rooms, or the woman America paid to see as a living scandal. She had become a survivor of her own legend. She had outlived many of the men who shaped her rise. Edward Langtry, the husband who had given her away off Jersey, was gone. The Prince of Wales had become King Edward VII and died. The admirers, patrons, rivals, and critics of her early life had faded into obituaries, memoirs, and anecdotes. Hugo de Bathe remained part of her life in name and arrangement, but not as the answer to any old loneliness. Lillie had spent a lifetime refusing to be owned. At the end, she possessed herself. The question was what that possession was worth when there was no one left close enough to share it. Her final years in Monaco reduced the stage to a smaller room. The Mediterranean lay outside. Monte Carlo offered its rituals of wealth, gambling, conversation, and performance. There were villas, newspapers, social calls, memories, and the small routines of a woman who had learned to live without asking permission. She read. She remembered. She maintained her appearance. She did not surrender easily to sentiment. The woman who had built a life from being looked at was now living in a world where fewer people were looking. That did not make her weak. It made her human. There is dignity in that, but also sadness. Fame had given Lillie movement. It had given her money. It had allowed her to cross boundaries that had been drawn tightly around women of her birth and era. It had taken her from a Jersey rectory to London society, from royal attention to American theaters, from advertisements to racecourses, from scandal to title. Fame had not given her peace. It had not given Jean Marie a mother she could fully trust. It had not turned marriage into intimacy. It had not kept the world from moving on. In February of 1929, Lillie Langtry died at Monte Carlo. She was 75 years old. The news traveled back to Britain, where the name still had the power to summon an age. Newspapers remembered the Jersey Lillie. They remembered the beauty, the prince, the stage, the scandals, the racehorses, the photographs, the woman who had seemed to invent a new way of being famous before the modern world had caught up with her. Her body was brought back to Jersey. That return matters more than any final luxury. After all the departures, after the yacht, London, Paris, New York, American tours, racecourses, theaters, and Monaco, Lillie returned to the island she had spent her life escaping. She was buried at St. Saviour's Churchyard, near the world where Emily Charlotte Le Breton had begun before she became Lillie Langtry, before the Jersey Lillie, before the stage names, titles, advertisements, and legends. The island had once seemed too small for her. In death, it was large enough to hold her. That is the full circle of the story. Jersey was the first boundary. Jersey became the final resting place. Between those 2 points, Lillie had outrun almost everything a woman of her generation was told to accept. She outran the quiet life of a rector's daughter. She outran a weak marriage. She outran the end of royal favor. She outran debt, scandal, and the assumption that a woman of society should not work. She outran the drawing room and entered the theater. She outran the theater and entered advertising. She outran the male world of racing by becoming Mr. Jersey. She outran the men who believed they had bought more of her than she intended to sell. She outran every boundary except the last. What remains of her now is scattered. A grave in St. Saviour's churchyard. Portraits and photographs that still carry the strange calm of the face that made London look. Postcards and images that helped create the idea of the celebrity as an object people could own in miniature. Advertising history, where her connection to Pear's soap remains a symbol of the moment fame began to sell ordinary products. Racing memory, where the name Mr. Jersey and the horse merman still point to a woman who entered a man's world through a fiction and took the winnings anyway. These are not just souvenirs. They are evidence. Evidence that Lillie Langtry stood at the beginning of something modern. She understood, earlier than almost anyone around her, that fame could be monetized. She understood that a face could move through media. She understood that scandal could be managed, that public curiosity could be converted, that beauty could be treated not as destiny but as capital. In that sense, she did not belong only to Victorian society. She belongs to the history of modern celebrity. Every advertisement built around a famous face carries a faint echo of her. Every performer who turns private identity into a public business walks through a door she helped open. Every personal brand that sells beauty, lifestyle, scandal, desire, and access is part of the world Lillie saw before it had a name. That is her historical meaning. But historical meaning is not the same as happiness. The system was designed to consume women like her. It was designed to look, judge, desire, use, and replace. Lillie refused to be consumed for free. She made the system pay. She took beauty, the most temporary asset Victorian society allowed her, and turned it into money, movement, and independence. That was her victory. The tragedy is that the tools of that victory could not build a home. Her grave in St. Saviour's churchyard is the object to remember. Not because it explains her whole life. No grave can do that. But because it holds the contradiction quietly. The girl who escaped Jersey came back to Jersey. The woman who made the world look is now marked by a stone. The celebrity who turned herself into an image ended where images no longer matter. There, the public story becomes simple again. A name, a date, place, and behind it, the cost of a life spent turning attention into freedom. That is the final truth of Lillie Langtry. She did not lose because beauty faded. Beauty always fades. She did not lose because men abandoned her. She learned how to survive that. She did not lose because society judged her. She turned judgment into publicity. Her sadness was sharper than failure. She won. She won money, fame, movement, title, and control over her own image. She learned to make a system pay for the beauty it had expected to consume for free. But the tools that built her independence could not build intimacy. They could not give Jean Marie back the truth of her childhood. They could not make marriage into companionship. They could not stop the world from moving on to newer faces, newer machines, and newer forms of fame. Lillie Langtry won the game beauty gave her. The tragedy is that winning that game still left her alone.